early 2008, as the financial crisis intensified, as concern about the strength of banks in Europe in particular, and as those banks found it harder to borrow dollars, and they needed to borrow dollars, you saw the LIBOR rates increase. LIBOR, as you know, is a reference to the London Interbank Offer Rate, which is a rate set in London by the British Bankers Association, which is an average of estimates of what a group of banks, predominantly foreign banks, might pay to borrow in 10 currencies at 15 different maturities. At that time, as the rate went up, there was a lot of concern in the market about the design of the rate and the potential that created for misreporting and the incentives banks faced to underreport as they faced, particularly foreign banks faced higher borrowing costs. At the New York Fed, we took a very careful look at those concerns in the market. Many of those concerns made it into the press. The Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times wrote about this in April of 2008. We looked at those concerns and we thought they were justified. We were very concerned about them. And on that basis, we took the following steps. We briefed the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, which is a group composed of the Secretary of the Treasury, the Chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, the Chairman of the SEC and the CFTC, among others. And my staff subsequently briefed the Treasury and the CFTC and the SEC following that initial meeting. But in addition to that, because again this was a rate set in London by the British Bankers Association, I raised this directly and personally with the Governor of the Bank of England, and I wrote a detailed memorandum to the Governor outlining a series of reforms to reduce the vulnerability in the rate. And the Bank of England was very receptive to those recommendations and indicated they supported them and would act on them. Now, it turns out, as the CFTC has testified, roughly about the same time, the CFTC initiated a far-reaching confidential investigation that, as you've seen, ultimately resulted in the initial settlement announced earlier this month. And that investigation, which is still ongoing, has come to involve a range of other regulatory authorities. Now, if you think about what's ahead, I just want to take a minute and outline what we think is important and necessary going forward. In addition to this ongoing enforcement investigation, which of course is very important to the integrity of our system, because a simple, important, necessary test for any financial system is, do we have the capacity to hold people accountable when they do these kind of things? So the investigations are still very important. But in addition to those, I want to highlight some of the additional work ahead of us. The Council and the relevant agencies are taking a very careful look at the potential implications for the functioning of the financial system of these remaining challenges. We are carefully examining, this is the members of the Council, carefully examining other survey-based measures of financial prices or interest rates to assess whether there's any other potential out there for the kind of problems we've seen in LIBOR. These entities are carefully examining potential reforms to LIBOR and alternatives to LIBOR. A broad global effort is underway, led by the chairman of the Financial Stability Board, which is a group that includes all the world's major central banks and market regulators like the SEC and the CFTC and their global counterparts, also examining reforms to the system. Now, in addition to these additional challenges ahead, we need to take a very careful look as a council of how we deal with a circumstance in which a confidential investigation, enforcement action, reveals evidence of behavior or practices that could have implications for the financial system as a whole. This is a challenge because, as you know, we have to have very careful safeguards to protect the confidentiality of those investigations, and yet I think we have to find a way to make that information, if it has systemic implications, available to key members of the Council in this context. We're taking a careful look at that. Finally, we have to take a careful look at other parts of the financial system where the markets rely on private organizations composed of private firms like the British Bankers Association that have some quasi-regulatory or self-regulatory role. As you've seen in this case, we've got to be careful to make sure that the system is not relying on associations of private firms that leave us vulnerable to the kind of things we've seen. Of course, it's very important to the integrity of our system that the enforcement authorities have the resources they need to do their jobs. You know, if there's a small town in America and its population grows by 10-fold or 100-fold in a 5-year period, you need to increase the size of the police department. It is absolutely important to do that. Now, the members of the council, I'm very confident, will be fully responsive to the oversight conducted by this committee and other bodies in Congress to examine this particular set of challenges and how we're dealing with them going forward, and we'll continue to keep the committee informed as we pursue the things I just outlined.